The stock market floor erupted in chaos as numbers plunged. Traders screamed, screens flashed red, and panic spread like wildfire. James Carter, 34, the reluctant entrepreneur, stood frozen in his cramped office, staring at the collapsing value of his startup shares. The narrator said, "One wrong move had triggered a financial avalanche." James whispered, "It's all slipping away." Outside, thunder rumbled, echoing the storm brewing inside his chest. His phone buzzed with angry investors, demanding answers. His sidekick Sarah Miller, 32nd, loyal yet fearful, said James, "We need to act now or everything we've built will burn." The room shook with tension as betrayal, debt, and survival closed in at once. The narrator said, James Carter's nightmare had begun long before the market crash. He had built his startup from borrowed money and endless nights, believing his dream could rewrite financial history. Now, as the storm rolled in, every sleepless hour mocked him. Sarah said, "We took risks, James, but this is different." He wanted to scream, yet silence felt heavier than words. Each message from investors pierced his chest like a blade. Shadows on the walls seemed to grow taller, devouring his confidence. James whispered, "If I fail, we all drown." The weight of survival pressed harder with every tick of the clock. The narrator said, the first call came from their largest investor. James gripped the phone, his voice cracking as he tried to sound composed. On the other end, Richard Hale, 55, male, the investor, barked, "You said this would be profitable." James stammered, "It was, until the market turned." Richard's growl carried menace. Sarah placed a hand on James' shoulder, steady but trembling. The weight of millions lost bore down like chains. James muttered, "If I lose him, I lose it all." The silence after the call ended was deafening. The storm outside mirrored the storm within. The narrator said, the betrayal had begun to show itself. James discovered an email chain buried in his inbox. His supposed mentor, Victor Grant, 58, male, was secretly negotiating with competitors. James whispered, "He sold me out." Sarah gasped, "Victor?" "He guided us." The weight of trust shattered into dust. The mentor's words of wisdom now echoed as manipulation. James clenched his jaw, the walls of his office closing in. Rage mixed with despair. He slammed his fist on the desk. "I trusted him," he muttered, voice trembling. The narrator said with every passing minute, James' world unraveled further. News alerts confirmed layoffs, stock collapse, and angry shareholders circling like vultures. James muttered, "It's gone." Sarah whispered, "We can still fight." But doubt clouded his mind. He saw the faces of employees who trusted him, their futures now hanging by a thread. The storm thundered louder, lightning illuminating his despair. James stood, shoulders heavy, staring at the skyline. "This is the end, or the beginning," he said, unsure if he believed it. The narrator said, James Carter had once been the dreamer. At 34, he had poured his life into building a company from nothing, fueled by borrowed money and restless ambition. Sarah Miller, 32nd, often reminded him, "We believed when no one else did." Their small office had once been alive with hope, the hum of computers and laughter of employees filling the air. Now those memories seemed like ghosts, haunting every corner. James stared at the company logo etched into the glass wall, the emblem of his sacrifice. He whispered, "I gave everything for this." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, steady but trembling. "And it gave us purpose," she said softly. The narrator said, the walls of their journey were built on debt and defiance. Investors had laughed at James' idea when he was just starting, yet he persisted, taking out loans he could barely repay. Sarah said, "We worked through every night, James." He remembered the days of eating instant noodles while sketching business plans on napkins. The taste of desperation had been bitter, but it fueled him. His friends abandoned him, doubting his sanity. Only Sarah stayed. James whispered, every sacrifice had meaning, until now. Rain tapped the windows, reminding them of time slipping away. The narrator said, "The startup had once been their shared heartbeat." James launched it with Sarah at his side, believing they could carve a new place in the world of finance. Their first employee, Emily Dawson, 26, female, bright-eyed and eager, had joined without hesitation. James smiled faintly, remembering her words. "I trust you, James." Now her trust weighed heavy like an anchor dragging him down. Sarah whispered, "They still believe in you." James turned away, ashamed. Do they? Or do they just fear what happens if I fail? The office felt colder, the walls closing in with every heartbeat. The narrator said, the weight of failure wasn't just numbers. James thought of his parents who had mortgaged their home to help him start. He recalled his father's words, "Don't let fear decide your future." Now that trust was at risk of being shattered. Sarah murmured, "They gave everything for you." James clenched his fists, feeling the burden of generations resting on his shoulders. "If I fail, I bury them in my mistakes," he muttered. The thunder outside punctuated his guilt, each strike reminding him of the cost of ambition. The narrator said, the heart of the storm was James' fear of becoming nothing. He remembered nights when hope had fueled him, when Sarah's laughter had broken the silence of their grind. Now, hope was replaced with dread. Sarah said, "You can't quit now. This company is who you are." James stared into her eyes, searching for strength. "And if I lose it?" he asked. Her voice wavered, but her words struck firm. "Then we rebuild, because failure is not the end." Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the choice he feared to make. The narrator said, "The storm outside was nothing compared to the war inside the boardroom." James Carter, 34, faced his investors, their eyes sharp as blades. Richard Hale, 55, snarled, "Your incompetence is killing my returns." James' pulse thundered. Sarah Miller, 32nd, whispered beside him, "Stay calm, don't give them blood." Every chart projected on the screen bled red, mocking his ambition. James forced a steady voice. "This company is more than numbers," he said. Richard laughed coldly. "Numbers are the only thing that matters." Silence swallowed the room, suffocating and cruel. The narrator said, "Whispers of betrayal spread like fire." James opened his inbox to find new evidence. Emails tying Victor Grant, 58, to a rival investor. James muttered, "The man I trusted most." Sarah gasped, her voice shaking. "He's feeding them everything." The mentor's words, once guiding stars, now burned like poison. James slammed his fist onto the table. He turned my dream into his bargaining chip. The air in the office felt heavy, thick with the stink of treachery. Sarah whispered, "We are running out of allies." The narrator said, "Debts piled like a mountain, threatening to crush everything." Banks sent final notices, red-stamped and unforgiving. James rubbed his temples, exhaustion carved deep into his face. Sarah whispered, "If we miss payroll, they'll walk." James muttered, "They trusted me with their lives." His phone buzzed again, relentless, each vibration a hammer against his chest. He saw Emily Dawson, 26, their employee, watching from the hall with frightened eyes. The guilt gnawed at him, louder than the storm. The narrator said, "Every deal felt rigged, every handshake poisoned." James sat across from a potential partner who smirked with veiled contempt. The man said, "Take this deal, or lose everything." James glanced at Sarah, whose eyes pleaded, "Don't." His gut churned with dread. He muttered, "This feels like a trap." The partner's grin widened, voice dripping with venom. "Sometimes traps are opportunities, if you're bold enough." The room reeked of manipulation, and James felt the walls closing in again. The narrator said, hope and despair collided within James' soul. Alone in the office, he stared at the skyline, neon lights blurred by rain. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. James whispered, "Maybe they were right. Maybe I was never enough." Sarah entered quietly, her voice soft. "You are more than they see." He turned, eyes hollow. "Then why does it feel like I'm already buried?" Lightning cracked, illuminating his broken silhouette. Silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. The narrator said, the truth came crashing down in a single email attachment. James Carter, 34, opened a hidden file that revealed secret agreements between Victor Grant, 58, and Richard Hale, 55. Betrayal burned through his veins like fire. Sarah Miller, 32nd, whispered, Victor was never guiding you. He was guiding them. James clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. He sold us out for profit, he said through gritted teeth. His dream wasn't collapsing from bad luck, but from sabotage. The world he trusted had twisted into a noose around his neck. The narrator said, Victor's mask had finally cracked. James stormed into Victor's office, confronting the man he once called mentor. Victor sat calm, sipping whiskey, his smile smug. James shouted, You betrayed me. Victor replied coldly, I taught you survival, not loyalty. The words sliced deeper than knives. Sarah said firmly, You ruined everything for greed. Victor shrugged, his eyes sharp with arrogance. Greed builds empires, he said. James' fury threatened to boil over, but silence weighed heavier than his rage. The narrator said, The revelation cut deeper than debt. James realized Victor had orchestrated the collapse to deliver the company into Richard Hale's hands. James whispered, Every sleepless night, every sacrifice stolen. Sarah's voice cracked. They used us as pawns. James stared at the city lights beyond the window, betrayal twisting into resolve. He muttered, If they think I'll surrender, they don't know me. The storm outside raged louder, mirroring the fury inside. For the first time, his despair burned into defiance. The narrator said, Amidst betrayal, a hidden fortune revealed itself. Sarah found overlooked documents in a dusty file cabinet, showing dormant assets tied to the startup. Her eyes widened. James, there's still money buried here. James leaned over, his breath catching. Enough to fight back? She nodded, trembling but hopeful. The discovery was a spark in endless darkness. James whispered, Then this isn't over. The revelation transformed despair into a weapon. For the first time, they had a chance to strike back. The narrator said, The twist was more than money. It was a chance at redemption. James and Sarah gathered employees late at night, revealing the hidden assets. James declared they tried to bury us, but we still stand. Emily Dawson, 26, raised her hand, voice shaking, We'll fight with you. The room buzzed with fragile hope. James looked around at their tired but determined faces. He whispered, This isn't the end. It's the beginning of war. The storm outside broke, rain pounding harder, but inside a spark had been lit. The narrator said, The boardroom became an arena where everything would be decided. James Carter, 34, stood across from Richard Hale, 55, who smirked with venomous pride. Richard taunted, One signature, James, and your company belongs to me. Sarah Miller, 32nd, whispered, Don't give him the satisfaction. James' voice trembled, yet strength flickered. This company isn't yours to take, he said. The air was charged with hostility, the weight of millions pressing against the silence. The gamble was about to begin, and one wrong move would end everything. The narrator said, James played his hidden card. He revealed the dormant assets Sarah had discovered, documents spread across the polished table. Gasps rippled through the room. Richard sneered, Paper won't save you. James countered, This paper buys us freedom. Sarah added, And it proves your scheme is flawed. Silence crackled with disbelief, as James' allies saw hope for the first time. The gamble was no longer survival, it was war. Richard's jaw tightened, his mask of control beginning to crack. The narrator said, The confrontation turned into a gamble of futures. Richard leaned forward, voice like poison. I'll bury you in lawsuits. James shot back, You can't bury what's already rising. Sarah placed her hand on the table, steady as stone. We've fought too long to bow now. The room pulsed with tension, each word a blow struck in silence. Richard's smirk faded into a scowl. James whispered, This is our last chance. and I'll risk everything." His gamble was not just money, it was his soul. The narrator said. The gamble rose to its breaking point. Richard slammed his fist onto the table, shouting, "You'll regret this defiance." James stood taller, voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'd rather fall on my own terms than crawl under yours." Sarah's eyes glistened with fear but burned with belief. The room went silent, the storm outside roaring like applause for rebellion. James' declaration was more than defiance, it was the birth of his final stand. The narrator said, "The climax was not numbers, it was will." James faced Richard with steady fire in his eyes. He whispered, "You underestimated me." Sarah said softly, "And you underestimated us." Richard's silence screamed louder than his threats. The storm outside broke into a downpour, drowning the city in relentless rain. Inside, James realized he had crossed the point of no return. The gamble was cast, the war declared. He had risked it all, and for the first time he no longer feared the fall. The narrator said, "The aftermath was as sharp as the storm." James Carter, 34, stood at the window of his battered office, watching the dawn break over a city soaked in rain. Sarah Miller, 32nd, placed documents on the desk, whispering, "We survived, but the scars remain." The hidden assets gave them breath, yet the fight left them drained. James whispered, "We held the line, but at what cost?" The silence in the office was heavy, filled with absent laughter and empty desks. For every victory, there was loss, and he felt both with equal weight. The narrator said, "The employees gathered, waiting for answers." James faced them, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "I can't promise wealth, but I can promise we rebuild," he said. Emily Dawson, 26, whispered, "We'll stand with you." Their faith pressed against his guilt, reminding him of the human cost. Sarah murmured, "They stayed because they believe in you." James looked across the faces, each weary yet determined, and realized survival was no longer enough. They needed redemption. The narrator said, Richard Hale, 55, retreated but not defeated. James received a letter filled with threats of lawsuits and sabotage. He read silently, his jaw tight. Sarah said, "He won't stop until you're destroyed." James replied, "Then we keep moving forward, no matter how many walls he builds." The enemy still breathed, but James no longer trembled. He whispered, "He taught me fear, now I'll teach him resilience." The war was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The narrator said, "Redemption came with rebuilding." James began restructuring the company, reaching out to small investors and loyal partners. Sarah worked tirelessly by his side, drafting plans late into the night. Emily said softly, "You gave us purpose again." James replied, "We're not finished until we prove they were wrong about us." The office, once a tomb, hummed with life again, though fragile. It was not wealth yet, but hope stitched into every corner, and that was enough to move forward. The narrator said, the resolution was not triumph, but survival. James stood at the rooftop of the building, overlooking the city lights. Sarah joined him, silent for a long moment before whispering, "We're still here, James." He closed his eyes, the wind carrying away his doubts. "We're still here," he echoed. Their war wasn't over, but the storm inside him finally calmed. The scars would never vanish, yet within them was proof they had endured. The narrator said, the final chapter opened, not with celebration but with silence. James Carter, 34, stood in the quiet office, staring at empty desks once filled with laughter. Sarah Miller, 32nd, whispered, "We lost so much, but we endured." James' eyes softened, but his voice held weight. Endurance doesn't erase the scars. The faint hum of computers was the only sound, reminding him of nights when ambition burned brighter than fear. Emily Dawson, 26, entered timidly, saying, "You gave us more than a job. You gave us belief." For the first time, James let himself smile. The narrator said, the IPO announcement came like thunder in clear skies. News broke that the company, once nearly buried, was going public. James sat stunned as headlines rolled across screens. Sarah whispered, "We did it." James muttered, "No, we survived it." His voice shook with awe, disbelief, and sorrow all at once. Investors who once mocked now cheered, their greed masked as faith. Emily said softly, "This is your redemption." Yet James' heart felt heavy, knowing the victory came with sacrifices etched forever. The narrator said, "The ringing of the stock exchange bell was both triumph and torment." James stood on the trading floor, surrounded by flashing cameras. He forced a smile as Sarah whispered, "This is history." James thought of every betrayal, every sleepless night, and whispered, "At what cost?" The crowd erupted, cheering as the company logo lit the giant screen. Emily clapped with pride, her eyes glowing with hope. Yet, deep inside, James knew success had stolen parts of him that no profit could ever restore. The narrator said, "Triumph carried the bitter weight of sacrifice." That night, James sat alone in his office, the glow of city lights spilling across papers on his desk. He whispered, "Millions in the bank, but silence in my soul." Sarah entered quietly, placing a glass of water beside him. She said softly, "We won, James." He met her gaze with tired eyes. Did we, or did we just survive long enough to sell our pain? The silence that followed spoke louder than words. The narrator said, "The story ended, not with wealth, but with a whisper." James stood on the rooftop, wind rushing past as he gazed at the sprawling city below. Sarah stood beside him, silent, as Emily joined, her young eyes full of belief. James whispered, "We built something from nothing. It nearly broke us, but it will outlive us." Sarah smiled faintly, tears glistening in the wind. Emily whispered, "Then it was worth it." Lightning cracked in the distance, but for once, James felt peace.